Hello and welcome to the Homeless Consultant channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. And we've reached, after 5 years, 200 subscribers on this channel. And it occurred to me that I do not often enough say thank you to my subscribers and viewers of my videos. I make these videos for you, and I'm very grateful that you watch them. So what I'm going to do today is give you something in return. I'm going to give you a gift. I'm going to tell you about a ton of free, open source, and low-cost software that could, depending on what you do, save you hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands of dollars. Okay, now as always with my videos, there's going to be some preliminaries. I have actually made this video. This is the third time. The first 2 times took about 3 hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move really fast this time. I'm going to put the links to the software in the description to this video so you can go research it yourself instead of me telling you every detail about it. But of course I have to have a few preliminaries, so I'm allocating myself 10 minutes for preliminaries. Right, let's see if I can do that. Where to begin? First of all, folks, when I come into this cheap hotel or motel, I have to go to storage and grab my desktop computer, my monitors, my accessories, hard drives, just all the stuff. They're packed. I have to bring them in here, set it all up. It takes maybe an hour to set everything up, get it out of the car, sometimes an hour and a half if it's raining or just so hot that I'm dying from carrying it all. And of course when I leave in the morning, I have to break everything down, pack it all up, and take it out of here. Let me just give you a quick look at generally what I'm dealing with here. This is what it looks like in the hotel after I get set up. I have my desktop computer with 2 monitors which don't match. The color doesn't match and the sizes don't match. And I have my laptop on an ironing board. Notice the ironing board does not have a cover on it. Like I said, this is not a 5-star hotel. And this is where I get my editing for these videos for the most part done. Sometimes I can do it in the car, but it's tough. And this is a cheap simulation of what I had in my apartment. In my apartment I had 2 large monitors the same size. I had all my gear set up at all times, all my accessories, anything I would need for audio, video, anything, music. It was already set up. It was just a matter of going to what I needed, grabbing it, turning it on. I might have to plug something in here and there, but for the most part, anything I wanted to do was ready to go. So I would get out of work, and instead of driving to a storage place, grabbing all that stuff, which takes a half hour, driving to a hotel, carrying all this stuff upstairs takes about 5 trips, then unpacking it, and instead of doing all that, I would just come home from work, open the door, go sit down in my chair and push the on button, and I was ready to go. It was a lot more productive then, but this is what I have to do. I mentioned in the video that was hosted by The Puppet, I mentioned that around the 4th of July of this year, 2021, my laptop computer died. What happened was Microsoft Windows 10 forces updates on you, whether you want them or not, whether they're good for your system or not, or whether they're going to destroy your computer or not. Thank you, Microsoft. At the same time, I was installing some music software which uses a authorization copy protection scheme that could best be described as a rootkit, which should be illegal. To put people who pay for your software through that while people who steal your software don't have to deal with that is just abominable. But it goes to such a low level on the computer to identify your computer uniquely that it can cause problems. And what happened was that I installed the new version of that authorization manager, and I had to reboot for that because it's basically a rootkit, and Windows in the background was installing an update that I knew nothing about. So the two of them started duking it out, grappling for control over my computer. And when it booted up again, I got the blue screen of death, the Windows recovery environment. And I never saw my computer again, ever. That was around the 4th of July. I have only now gotten this computer running here in about the 3rd week of September. It took me that long. If I had a home, I could have gotten all that up and running probably in about 2 weeks. It wouldn't have been quicker because I had to do a lot of research on Windows 10 and what it does at the very lowest levels of your computer. But in a home, I can do that kind of research. Look at my last video, The Cost of Being Homeless. It talks all about my productive hours. The productive hours there would have let me learn all that so that I could deal with this computer. But when I'm in the car, I don't have that much time. And I certainly don't have access to the internet. Well, I didn't at home either, but I mean, I could go sit in a coffee shop for as long as is needed to look up what I need to look up. So here it is, almost 3 months later, 1/4 of a year, and I'm just now getting the computer up and running, and I have to get everything installed and then make a backup. Backups is something else. When I had my home, everything, it was all set to back up regularly. This wasn't an issue if it happened. But living in the car, you can't do that. You can't maintain regular backups like that. It isn't feasible. To back up a terabyte hard drive, that can sometimes take 15 hours. There's no way. It can't be done. As I was reinstalling the software, which frankly I'm not getting it all in there, I'm just getting the stuff that needs special authorizations, and then I'll make the backup. It's probably going to take a good 3 months more to get all my software installed on this laptop computer. That's what it took last time when I bought it. So that's going to be about 6 months of downtime from this computer, all because of Microsoft and this authorization company who punishes people who buy software and doesn't do anything to people who steal software. As I'm reinstalling the software, it occurred to me that over the years I have accumulated a lot of free and open source and low cost software, and I realized that people out there that I've talked to about it before generally don't know anything about it. And I thought, well, I mean, I'm using all this stuff, and my viewers might benefit from knowing about this software. I mean, it's just second nature for me to use this software, but a lot of people out there don't even know about open source software. They don't realize that all those software packages that cost $500 usually have a free equivalent somewhere that's just as good, sometimes better. That's what I'm going to share with you today. Now I have to back up just a little bit. If you go back to around 1980 or so, the first time I ever used a personal computer, it was probably a Commodore PET, I would imagine. My math teacher had a Commodore PET, and he lived down the street. And I was so amazed by what that computer could do that I started reading books, reading magazines, and I borrowed his computer for about 2 weeks when he went on vacation once. I took it apart, saw how it worked inside, and I taught myself how to turn all of the programs into assembly language using debug, a program in MS-DOS, and reverse engineer, and that's how I learned how to program, and that's how I learned the low-level functions of a computer. I didn't even have my own computer for many years after that. And when our school, about 2 or 3 years later, finally got a computer lab, they wouldn't let me take the class because I already knew more than the teacher did. And I didn't even have my own computer. When I graduated high school and went to college, I was studying aerospace engineering. I wanted to work on the space shuttle. I was still living in that fantasy cult world that the fake media builds up, and I thought NASA was legit. And barely into my studies there, the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, killing 7 astronauts. And because I'm a responsible citizen, I followed the investigation over the next many months. That was, who was that? That was Feynman. Feynman, the physicist, was the one who, to his credit, stood up and said, we're not going to cover this up, we're going to tell the truth. And the truth was, those 7 astronauts died not because of engineering failures, they died because of management failures, because of political failures. And I think it was 23 years later when the Space Shuttle Columbia disintegrated as it was entering the atmosphere to land, killing another 7 astronauts. And what do you know, folks? The investigation there showed that it wasn't engineering that did it. Ultimately, engineering was a big part of it, but ultimately it was bad management and politics. But back in college, when that happened to the Challenger, I realized it was my first introduction to reality instead of the nonsense that you're taught in the mass media and in schools and by experts. That's when I realized that you could be the best engineer in the world. You could build a time machine. But if the managers and the politicians are stupid, bad things are going to happen. So I left aerospace engineering and I kind of floundered for a while because I didn't know what to study. And after a few years, my girlfriend at the time said, well, why don't you study computer science? I mean, that's all you do is work with computers. You know it inside and out. And I said, but yeah, that's the whole point. I already know it. Why would I want to pay all that money to get a degree in something I already know? But in the end, that's what I ended up doing. So, you know, I got my bachelor's degree. Probably didn't even have to go to class. Then I went to graduate school. Now, graduate school, I was being exposed to things I hadn't seen before, like, you know, discrete math and a lot of things that even one of the ones that stands out to me is the computer ethics class, which ended up being a waste of time given the way that things went, didn't it? But at least they were trying back then. But once I was in grad school, I realized that politics and bad management and bad administration, cult behavior made graduate school just absolute nonsense. It was a complete waste of time and money. Absolute, utter. And, you know, I had wanted a PhD my whole life, and by that time ever since, I have just felt like I am so grateful I do not have that PhD after my name. That would be a badge of shame for me to prove to the world that I'm able to jump through the hoops that stupid people put in front of me, that cults put in front of me. I want nothing to do with that. And I am so grateful that it took me many, many years to really accept what I was seeing and experiencing in graduate school, but it was a joke, it was a scam, it was a fraud. And I'm sorry to all of you out there who went to graduate school and graduated. Some programs may be better than others, but as a rule, you don't get a PhD unless you do what those other people tell you to do, and you're trusting that they know what they're doing. And most of the time, they don't have the foggiest idea what they're doing. Often, what they're doing is the opposite of truth, reality, productivity, competence. 2 space shuttles destroyed by bad management. Much like, you know, half of the reason I'm living in a car today is because of the horrific management at this medical company I was in. See, that's the problem. When you have stupid people running the show and they don't have any heart, any humanity, everything's a dollar sign to them, and human beings don't mean anything next to that dollar sign because they've got to have a nice car, they've got to have a nice home, they've got to have a $500 hat, they've got to have the little porcelain knickknacks on their fireplace. You get a world like the one we're in today. Now, what happened with computers was this, and this is the fast, quick and easy, best explanation I can give. In 1980, when I first looked at computers, the only real computer company, a software company I could think of was Microsoft. And Microsoft, Bill Gates was locking in Microsoft DOS, the operating system at the time, into all these computers, you know, the IBM PC Junior and what came to be known as PCs, and things like Commodore PET and the Commodore 64, Atari, they kind of went by the wayside when it came to productive computers because of what Bill Gates was doing. Now, of course, DOS was not the best operating system in the world. I mean, I wrote my own operating system back in the 1980s. I know what goes into an operating system. It wasn't that good. It wasn't bad at the time, I guess. It got worse and worse and worse, and to what it is today, which is a nightmare, but it wasn't bad. But what Bill Gates did was lock it into all these computers free. Nothing comes free, folks. Nothing. By giving that stuff away free, and because everyone wanted it free, we're stuck with Microsoft being one of the world rulers today, and Bill Gates out there pretending that he knows something about medicine. There was another company that started pretty early in there. It was a game company. It was called Sierra Online. This was founded by Ken and Roberta Williams. And I'm sorry, I don't remember. I want to say they were in Seattle, but I don't think they were. I think they were in California. This was a married couple, and Roberta was just cute as a button. I think her picture was on the back of the boxes. If you remember things like King's Quest, Police Quest, Space Quest, all those Quest games. Now the graphics today, you look at that and you're just like, oh my gosh, how could I ever have looked at that? But the thing was, at the time, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And it just took your imagination. Your imagination filled in the blanks of those rotten graphics. But Ken and Roberta, from their home, they started making these games. I believe Roberta would design them, Ken programmed them. And they had a hard time. They had a really hard time, but once they started taking off, they took off really, really fast. And they struggled and sacrificed and almost went out of business, and what they did was the definition of the American dream. And frankly, that was about the last time we ever saw the American dream, the true American dream in this country. These were just ordinary people who had an idea, and they did it, and they did it well, and they worked, and they sacrificed. Nobody gave them anything. They ate peanut butter, presumably. Now, as their company took off, they kind of kept it going and everything, but I don't know, it's probably around the early 90s maybe earlier. They retired. They sold the company and they retired. And ever since then, for about 30 years, they've been traveling the world on their boat, living in beautiful houses on seashores and enjoying life. See, they didn't need to take over the world. They didn't need to go out there and tell 8 billion people what kind of poisonous concoction you have to stick in your arm and into your bloodstream. That's not what they wanted to do. They wanted to make games that they like, and when they got wealthy from it and they had established a good company, they retired young and they went out and explored this beautiful, magnificent world that nobody can see when they're staring at this idiot box all the time. I love Ken and Roberta Williams. They are heroes of mine. God bless them and their family. They set the good example for what Americans could do as computers were taken off, not Bill Gates. Unfortunately, most of these companies went the Bill Gates route. What we ended up with, I know I'm past 10 minutes, I knew it would happen, I knew it. What can I do? What happened was all these companies, as they started pulling stunts like Bill Gates did to lock their stuff in, or they might have just had a legitimately really good product, or for whatever reason they became the leader. Many of these companies started doing really awful and sleazy things to lock down their position. In other words, they were anti-competitive. You know, Bill Gates is the guy who he would come out there and just, anybody with
A great idea in their garage can throw me off my pedestal tomorrow.
That's what Bill Gates would always say. You know what? When you give your software away to every computer on the face of the earth that's a PC, and everybody's using it, and someone has an operating system that is 1,000,000 times better than yours, how are they going to get it on those computers that come with Microsoft DOS? See, very, very anti-competitive. You see it today on the internet. You had all these companies start up, they were fantastic. You had Netscape and what was the file sharing one that kept getting sued? You had all these fantastic, creative, innovative companies that were really cool and beneficial. And what do we end up with today? Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. And they control the world. They even determined who became the President of the United States of America last year when the American people chose a different person. That's how powerful these companies are. And what we had in the 80s and the 90s was, in the 90s, sometime around 1990, I don't know when, but Microsoft went to Windows. So instead of MS-DOS, they went to Windows. Now, Windows was copying the Apple operating system. I'm not going to talk about Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. That's another horrible thing I just don't even want to get into. I never used Apples and Macs. I'll just let those guys burn on their own. When Microsoft went to Windows, they were copying Apple. And Apple even made fun of them in their advertisements. Oh, look who's trying to catch up with us. The original Windows ran on DOS. DOS was still the operating system, disk operating system, DOS. Windows ran on top of it. Around the time of Windows, after 2.0, 3.0, 3.1, around the time of Windows 95, Windows itself became the operating system, and instead of running on DOS, it had some functions that emulated DOS. A total 180. That's when users like me lost our power over our own computers. Because DOS gave you low-level power, like the program Debug, which is probably the greatest piece of software ever made. Can't even run the thing anymore. Likewise, you had other companies that took off and gained all this power. One of them was called Adobe. Adobe came out with programs like Photoshop, to the point where today, if you take a photo and you modify it and you insert and extract things, they call it, quote, photoshopping. Just like, Kleenex. It may not be Kleenex brand, but you call it a Kleenex. Adobe had Premiere, the video editing software, and that became the de facto standard, even in Hollywood. They had After Effects with it. Illustrator for graphic design, InDesign, and now they have Character Animator. And another thing Adobe did was they came up with PDF. Okay, PDF files for being able to read documents and port them from one machine to another easily for compatibility. It was a brilliant thing. It was a useful, good thing. But Adobe, it wasn't good enough to just provide the world with something good. They had to control it. They had to lock it, put chains on it, and a ball, handcuffs, and they had to control it. Control is the key word here. So you ended up with Adobe Reader. They would give it away for free. Remember, nothing is free. There's always a hidden cost. They're locking people into PDFs where someone in their garage is making something that's even better than a PDF, but it truly would be free. But Adobe wasn't going to let that happen. Adobe Acrobat. See, the trick was you could read PDFs, but if you wanted to create a PDF so other people could read it, you had to pay out the wazoo, and you had to pay Adobe. In the music industry, you had Pro Tools. Pro Tools is the one that took off as the main DAW, the digital audio workstation. It simulates a real music studio. If you've ever seen a music studio with all those faders, all those sliders, and electronic gear and everything, monitors, all the effects and recording equipment, a digital audio workstation emulates that. It even looks like it on your screen. Pro Tools was the first really big one, and what happened? They became big, they became bloated, it hogged all your resources on your computer, and they started locking people down to the point where now they have subscriptions, and Adobe as well. Adobe now uses subscriptions. So instead of paying, I'm just making up numbers, instead of paying $400 for Photoshop, you can now pay only $179 every year. Year after year after year after year. And if you ever miss a payment, your Photoshop stops working. See, when you buy software and it's good for as long as you can keep your computer running it, that's called a perpetual license. And that's what it should be. Remember that business ethics class I took in school? About the only useful class I had in graduate school? And even then, a little shaky butt. That was one of the things they were talking about. And they started coming up with these lunatic ideas like, well, you're not buying the software, you're buying a license for the software. Okay? Just locking people, ball and chain. Adobe was big behind that. Pro Tools did the same thing. Even in academia, Mathematica, the program for doing mathematical equations and for notation for mathematics. Incredibly useful if you do mathematics research. Mathematica, because it was sold to universities, could charge whatever they wanted to. You know why? Because the universities just had to turn around and raise tuition to pay for it. So that you, as a student, pay more. And then you have to go out and get a student loan. And if you watch my video on the student loan industry, you'll see what that's all about. Another complete, utter fraud and a scam. You see how these tie together? That's because Mathematica wanted to get a lock on everything. Even back then there was a system tool program called, it was made by Iolo, System Mechanic. It was my favorite, I don't know when, the early, mid-90s maybe late 90s. Did all these little things for basically a tune-up for your computer to keep it running smoothly. They now use subscriptions. And if you go to their site, look at this. It says only $29.95. And it's like, wow, that's a heck of a deal. $29.95 for software that's going to keep your system running high performance. But then you click on it and you go to a different place on the website, and now what's it say? Now it says only $29.95 in red bold text, but after it in small black text it says / per year. Oh, I guess it doesn't cost $29.95 like the other page said. In other words, I guess they lied. It costs $29.95 every single year. And if you get all these subscriptions, you can end up with every couple weeks throughout, as you go about your year, every couple weeks another software vendor is charging another subscription and your bank account's going down. How are you supposed to keep track of your finances that way? You're not a business. You can't do it. And in the end, you pay 5-10 times as much as you would otherwise, maybe more. Steam came along, I don't know when, I'm going to guess, wild guess, around the year 2000. I was never much of a big gamer. I mean, early on when I was young, I did, but the original Microsoft Flight Simulator was basically, I don't have a pen, but it was basically a stick that would tilt like this, and down below they'd have these little stick boxes, and those were supposed to be buildings, and the little stick boxes would go by, and that's supposed to, it was horrible. But again, your brain filled in the rest. That's what made it so beautiful. Well, video games obviously went a long way. They look like Hollywood movies now. But then Steam came along. With Steam, you can't play that game unless you're connected to the internet. Again, it's an authorization process like this one that destroyed my computer that dealt with music software. So from the time Steam came around, I never bought video games again, with the exception of what I'm going to tell you about here. But I stopped gaming, period, other than what I'm going to tell you about. And the last one would be iLock. iLock is the one that destroyed my computer along with Windows Update. iLock is a rootkit. I don't care what they want to call it. It's a rootkit. It gets into the lowest levels of your computer, and no third-party software has any business being there. Anyone who gets that low level in your computer, the FBI should be knocking on their door. But iLock does it. Why? To torture people like me who actually paid for our software. Meanwhile, the hackers are out there on some kind of a BitTorrent downloading a totally free version that doesn't even need iLock because they're stealing it. You see, this is the kind of lunacy. When in 1980, computers could have gone in any direction, but they didn't. They didn't go the good direction. They didn't go the Ken and Roberta Williams route. They went the Bill Gates route. And our species globally is suffering horrifically because of it. Now, so that's just a background, broad brush overview of what happened with computers through my lifetime. I'm leaving out just tons. I could talk about that, what was his name? Jack Tramiel, I think it was, at Commodore. Just ruthless. Just the Marquis de Sade of computer software. Just a vicious, rotten person. Just, ugh. I mean, I could talk about these people all I want. I could talk about McAfee. I think it's John McAfee, right? You know, the antivirus. Look him up sometime, see what he's doing today. If nothing else, he's an interesting character. This guy, like, tried to start his own country. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry, his own dictatorship. Let me elaborate a little bit on that. So what has happened over these years, especially with the internet becoming publicly accessible through browsers that use HTML and such? What's happened is people who have an interest, like in music, and they have programming skills, they get together and they design their own software. So instead of having to go to Pro Tools, they design their own. And by doing that, they can update it whenever they want, they can tailor it to their needs. It's functional because they're both a musician and a programmer. So it works really, really well. Whereas a place as large as Pro Tools, you know, Avid, the company that makes Pro Tools, they make other stuff as well. They make video stuff. The executives of Avid most likely don't know how to play the bongos, and yet they're making the most powerful, or most popular music production software. See, this is the problem. Again, bad management. Rotten, bad management who doesn't know what they're doing. Like this clown who came into the medical company I was at, didn't know anything about our company, and instead of talking to us who knew everything about the company, he immediately goes out and spends the stockholders' money on a third-party consulting firm to come in and figure out what our company does. This is bad management, folks. I could have stepped into that president's seat and ran that company competently. I mean, seriously, I could have. But they weren't even going to look at that. That's bad management. And that's what you get with these big companies, all the way to Google and Twitter and everything else. That's why the world's in the bad shape it is. And computers are a lot of the reason. But these people who started creating this software on their own, they would often give it away for free, and they would not only give away the software, they would also give away the source code, the programming code. And that's called open source software. It's free. And not only is it free, but depending on the community that forms around that, it can be updated very, very frequently, sometimes weekly. So it's always on top. They're constantly doing bug fixes. They're constantly testing it. And yeah, the users are beta testers, you could say, but you know, it's free. So there's other companies that for other reasons might make free software that they give away just to bring you into their website, to bring you into their ecosystem of software so they can sell you other things. Now some of those are really scary. There's a thing called NCH software that scares the dickens out of me. And if you ever do a Google search on free software for anything, almost every time at the top it's going to say NCH software. That one terrifies me. The one time I ever tried installing something like that, I don't think I ever got it uninstalled, and it just installed all kinds of crap. I'm not saying it was a virus, I'm not saying it was malware, but what they did hijacked my computer, and I never asked them to do that. So if you see NCH software when you're searching for software, run away. That's my opinion, that's my recommendation to you. But there's other companies who do offer some really cool, at least small utilities. And with that, there's my 10-minute introduction. Okay, so it was 30 minutes. Let's fly like a fast bird through this software. Again, you're going to have to research it for yourself. I can't do everything for you. And I'm going to have to really try to withhold my natural tendency to explain all these things to you.